Just jumping back to what made the group successful is when I hired people, I would always try to scare them.
What do you mean?
It was my job to make them not want the job.
What do you mean? Okay, good. Austin, thanks for coming on. We appreciate you. All right, the Trust Business Podcast. So you do Humanagement.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's the founder of a software development. Tell us about that. Tell us what Humanagement is and what it brings to the table, and tell us about that.
Certainly. So Humanagement is basically a platform for managing employees. It specializes in like training employees, goes into like stats, keeping track of their production, and then goes as far as most HR software. So like normal employee information, social security numbers, clock in and out, handling their benefits, that sort of stuff.
Wow. Okay, so you've created this software. My company uses it, so I'm very familiar with it, and I know how cool it is. Tell me about your backstory. Where do you come from, and how do you get into developing an app, developing a software? I mean, that's so cool.
Certainly. So early in life, I was destined to be a musician. So I was a musician for the first 8 years of adulthood.
What instruments?
I used to play bass, and then I went into like tour managing and booking tours and everything in that world. So I lived in that world for 8 years, on various jobs, traveling, touring. I ended up really like being a tour manager, and that's kind of where I first fell in love with HR.
Yeah.
So as a tour manager, not a lot of people know what that is, but you're basically in charge of keeping things together on the road, but you're also in charge of all the different crew, making sure that supplies are there, making sure that you get to the right place at the right times, dealing with closing out.
You're HR for musicians. As a
tour manager, right. So I basically ended up being HR for musicians. And so
that's a fun crowd to be HR for.
It's fun, challenging, but very, very interesting. And, one of the things that's really interesting on doing HR for bands is those people are sleeping, about 6 inches from you.
Right.
So it's not like it's just the guy you see in the office. It's like, this is the person who I'm going to spend every day with for the next 4 months.
Yeah.
And so, those hiring decisions become really, really important, and managing those expectations and the upsets and handling all those things are like at a much higher stake. So when I decided to leave the music industry, I was like, okay, well, if all of the random skills that I have, like booking tours, designing merch, whatever, being a musician myself, like what part do I love the most? And it was like, oh, actually, it would be HR. That's what that would translate to. So I started kind of getting into HR. I was like a senior HR executive at a theme park for a while.
Oh, wow.
Which and then Screamageddon.
Screamageddon, where's that?
It's like a Halloween park in so I had a
cool.
Yeah, in like Dade City, I had to hire like 500 people in like a month.
Wow.
And put them in hierarchies.
Because it's temporary. The Screamageddon
is
it's
like 6 months thing, or whatever, right? So and running crews to set up things is lots and lots of fun. And then I got into a company called Equity and Help, which they are a investment company.
Yeah.
So they have like a very unique investment model that they kind of invented themselves. So the job was not only fun on the hiring side, but it was challenging because there aren't people with experience. Like if you want to go and hire someone who's going to be able to close people, you can say, great, this is home services. I'm looking for someone with experience, home services. You can find that.
Yeah.
You want someone who knows how to put up roofs. You can find that.
Yeah.
Right. When we're saying at E&H, it was like, okay, well, we need someone who can manage hiring people to do roofs and plumbing in small towns all around US, and there's never going to be a house in more than one house in a town.
Right.
So like that's a weird challenge. Like you have to hire people through Facebook and deal with like there's just not people who have that experience unless they do this exact job, which people don't.
Right. It's kind of very unique or whatever.
Yeah, or like using. First, where I got into software was doing HR there and doing some. I was also over like sales and marketing and property purchasing. I ended up building an algorithm to help us like analyze properties. That was a really big challenge too. We would say, great, here's this list of thousands of properties. We need to find the best ones. No one has experience in that.
Right.
Right. Especially not in your little small community if you're trying to hire locally and you're not in like New York City. Right.
Right.
So that was also really fun on like the HR side. It really challenged me to not just hire good people, but really get in more inside of like the training side and like understanding where people's knowledge is and how to bring it to places. So as I was in there and I was in that role, and I first started with like the algorithm for buying properties. I then was, as we were expanding, the company was Inc. 500 3 years in a row.
Wow.
So, lots of expansion. I was going, okay, well, how do I keep everything?
How many employees did you guys have at that company when you were your largest?
At the largest, it was about 50.
Okay, so
Yeah.
good sized company.
Yeah. So as we were expanding, I was going, okay, well, how do I keep things in check? And that's where I was like, I couldn't find the tools that I needed. And so started building Humanagement on the side.
Okay, you couldn't find a software for that role that you personally really liked. So
Yeah.
you were like, maybe there's a place in the market for me to create one that's the style I like it, and then that goes there.
Yeah, originally it wasn't even for the market. It was
Yeah.
just like I was in the role and I needed some tools.
Oh, you were creating it literally for yourself
Just
in
for
that
me.
company. Wow.
Yeah. And so as I was doing that, I then while talking to other friends who also had businesses, they were like, wow, I really like these systems you have set up. I wish I had something similar. So then as I was going, okay, well, I kind of reached the ceiling that company, my next transition would be to then take this software to the mass market.
And take it to the market. Okay, awesome, man. Good. So so like I said, I mean, my company uses the software. I really like it. I'm a fan of it. That's why I wanted to have you on the show. And also I like you. Obviously I know what it is and what it does. Tell the audience, like, what does that software do? Who's it for? What's the purpose of it? And how is that beneficial to like a small business?
Yeah, so it really, I try to build it from the viewpoint of the business owner, because even in like the world of like HR softwares, those are built for like a fictional HR post, right? And they're not really built for like the growth of the business. So things like, while they might have something for putting in a policy or two, they don't really have a system for training people.
Yeah.
Or it's not really something cohesive with like keeping track of production and stuff like that. So I brought in those other features because they kind of made the software more round, like to have like the clock in and out and the benefit tracking and that sort of stuff. But really who it's for is for a business that's growing and they want a way to keep everything together. A lot of companies, as I kind of created the company and then was talking to more and more businesses, I found that a lot of businesses are kind of afraid of growth, especially like fast growth, because they're kind of like, the Icarus problem or,
What's the Icarus problem?
I think it's Icarus, right? Flew too high to the sun.
Oh, okay.
Right,
It's like a mythology.
Mythology, right? So flew too high to the sun, his wax wings ended up melting and then he fell, right? Which is actually really funny when you think about it, because those people didn't know science.
Yeah.
We now know that if you go up, it doesn't get hot.
Yeah.
It gets cold.
Yeah.
So his wings would have performed great. You can't fly too close to the sun and have things melt. That's not how it works. Anyways, but yeah, so businesses that they have that apprehension because the human the HR problem of, okay, we're going to add more people, and are those people going to erode the core business?
Right, because as you add people, if they're not trained,
they're
not like rolling and doing things in the way that the company wants them to be done, then the company inevitably, the quality is going to go down.
Yeah.
You're going to lose something in that process, which is obviously the last thing you want as a business owner. So I agree with you. That is one of the reasons that businesses a lot of them stay small, just because for them, they're like, I can control it that way. It works. Why
it works
break
now. So it's like, but obviously that's a silly idea. It's really just because they don't have a way of like running things down.
Yeah.
Which I don't know is also something that like, it's been really interesting going from having a company that does very well to trying to help other companies do very well.
Yeah.
Because you get associated with problems in a different way.
Yeah.
Right. Like one of the big problems that I see business owners have is the word obvious. That's like a word that I'll always tell people, like, obvious, just remove it from your vocabulary, dictionary, thought, mind, whatever. Right.
Yeah. Because
like for me, I always had a pretty good job. I did a pretty good job keeping employees wanting to stay at the company and wanting to contribute to the group. Right.
What were some of your number one successful actions in doing that and keeping like employees winning, doing well? Because I know I have a lot of stuff that I do too, but it's so important because if you have an employee, sometimes they're there for a year and they can start to burn out, and that's where you get that turnover, and that's bad. The most successful companies are able to keep and retain their company or their employees for long periods of time. So what were successful actions you found in that?
Yeah. One thing that I did all the time, which I've seen you do as well the few times I've been here, is you just stay in communication with your employees. Like they're as alive as you communicate to them, right?
Yeah.
So all the time I'll see people and they'll kind of like, it's actually really funny because I saw in the music industry too, where they have this idea of this like glass tower, right? You put someone up in a tower and then they're more important because they're harder to reach. And by cutting access, you then create like this, I don't know, something that's supposed to work. And I see it all the time. This viewpoint, this idea gets put in. I've never seen that be particularly successful.
I agree.
Because it cuts that line and makes someone feel like they're not a part of the group. The second one person is inaccessible to someone else, that's no longer a group. Now there's these people and those people. There's us and them.
Right.
And then you get into like, one of the things that I find that happens in a company that's really bad is where people start to go, oh, well, my job is this, your job is that. The mistake happened not because I did all my things and that guy, and there ends up being these chasms between employees, right? Where someone says, okay, my job is to book the sales call.
In roofing, we have that all the time because we have I have my sales side and my production side. Production, oh my God, with sales. Oh my God, with production. It's like this, and it's this thing of like, hey, guys, we're all a team.
Yeah.
Let's look at what we could have done better and let's help our teammates do better over there. And let's keep rocking and rolling and going forward. But yeah.
Yeah, because like the problem is that like in that, when someone says my job stops here, right? I stopped my job because I closed the sale and that was all I did, right? Then the next person also is making their lines in the sand as where it starts and stops. And then the gap between those two people ends up falling upwards.
Yeah.
Right? It's like reverse gravity. So they go, okay, well, I booked the call and he said he was going to be there. And the next guy went, okay, well, my job is to show up at the appointment.
Yeah.
But then there was no one whose job it was to make sure the person arrived at the appointment.
Yeah.
Really, it could have been both or it could have been one. But because there was that line in the sand, when people are going, well, I keep showing me appointments and no one's there, it falls up. Right. And then that's really the problem that I find that people run into, make them go, ooh, I don't like growing. Because as I grow, all these little chasms that people create fall upward, and that doesn't feel good, right? Yeah. When you have a small team and you've had them forever and you have, especially there's a lot of companies that like to have like 3 employees because those 3 employees know each other, they're friends, and those gaps don't really exist. Yeah. And so one of the things
that's actually it's a really good point, actually. When something goes from one department to another, then it's in that in-between stage. Because once, like I know in my company, once my project manager really has a project, then it goes perfectly fine.
Sure.
Like whatever. But it's that point where sales kind of transfers it and they don't really grab it completely for whatever reason. That's always where there's problems and issues, et cetera.
Yeah, exactly. So like I did a few things to try to help with that. One, how hard you come down on employees really affects that. Not that you shouldn't come down if someone messes up. You should, definitely. But there's a responsibility for hatting that people so often miss.
And hatting, you mean like training?
In training, right? Yeah. So if you never told your employee that these things were responsibilities, or you never really, not just told them it, but ironed out the ideas in their head to make sure they really understood, then don't yell at them for not doing it right.
Yeah.
Because all that's going to do is you're going to take the initiative that they did take, that they messed up on, and you're going to tell them, don't take initiative. Because if you take initiative and it's wrong, you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
And so when you do that, you're creating people. That's why the chasm exists. Chasm doesn't exist because people naturally don't want to help each other. Chasm exists because people don't want to be yelled at.
Yeah.
And the best way to do that is to limit their responsibility.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point on that because I feel like if you have an employee and like yelling at them is your solution to get them to work then that's not a good relationship anymore.
No.
That's not a good thing.
No.
Like it should be, hey, we're on the same team, let me train you, let me help you, let me get in touch with you, what's going on, and work it out. Like yelling, there's a time and place for it.
Sure.
Someone really just makes a mistake and it's in the immediate whatever, but for the most part, I don't like that. And one thing about correcting people that I find is very successful and good thing is always in private, never in front of the group and making it a whole big thing.
No.
That always upsets people. In private, one-on-one, and from like a point of help. And then on the other end of it, a lot of encouragement and positive, and do that in front of the entire team. Hey, Joe was really awesome. He did great, in the warehouse today, whatever, in front of the whole team. And then if Joe has a problem, over on the side, hey, Joe, these are the things I want to see worked on. Okay, good. How can we solve this? Okay, good. And then send them back in.
Yeah.
And that's a mistake I see people make is correcting or challenging people or doing that in a group environment.
Yeah.
It just always creates upset.
Yeah, 100%. You have to like also think when you're correcting someone that they're trying. If there's something to correct someone on and you're not just saying I should fire them, then most of the time it's because they tried. And so if you correct them like with a help flow, hey, you're trying to do this, let me help you try to do it better. Yeah. Right? That's a very different thing than like, hey, don't mess up because this is my company or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Or don't mess up because blah, 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 whatever. And now I have to get out of my chair and do blah, blah, blah. Like, okay, but that's your job, Yeah. The job of the executive is to like set up the company in a way that they don't have to get out of their chair. It's not someone's fault that they had to get out of their chair. It's your fault for having not set it up in a way that you wouldn't have to get at. right? Like you have to think of that problem.
Right.
And so one of the other things that we kind of would continuously do that I really liked is we would kind of, I would always try to come up with ways of getting people to kind of talk about their job and the problems they're running into, not as like and then this guy caused this problem, but just like as an open discussion, right?
Right.
So like we would do things like in the morning, right? And we'd have people, we would call them like games. They weren't really games, but we would be always things that would kind of like invite other people to understand or know or be interested in a person. So it could be something as unwork related as like, what are your favorite places to eat, or what are your favorite songs? Tell me a story about your childhood, right? Or it might be more specific, like, we're talking about a product and we're doing like a dummy run of, okay, this is what I do with a product and this is what I hand it off to the next person, right? Because when you do something like that and you're having it in a large group setting, and you have to be very careful, it's not a gripe session. It's not, and then this person usually doesn't do this, so I have to do blah. But just, hey, this is the thing I do with it and this is where I hand it, because the people, they'll kind of see those chasms.
Right.
They'll see the spaces because they'll go, okay, give it more teeth. So, we're talking about roofing and someone says, great, I booked a call. And then after I booked the call, I sent an email to Bob so he'd know when the appointment is. Then Bob goes, okay. And then I went to the appointment. And then they'll both kind of sit there. No one has to say anything. They'll go, but what if the guy, how would we know if they didn't show up? Oh, interesting. Okay, well, maybe Bob, if he shows up to the appointment, maybe he was never telling the sales guy that the person didn't show up to his appointment.
Right.
So or the lead setter or the whatever, right? Because if he never told them, then there can never be a corrective action on how they're setting the appointments. These types of thoughts are what people, it's the challenge of the job. It's what makes it fun is, they get to think and solve problems, within confinement.
Yeah, I like that about bringing somebody in and just basically talking to them about what are the challenges on the job, what's going on, and et cetera. And I find that really successful and really important in making it okay for people to have suggestions about how the company can improve, how their role can improve, how it can get better. And that's a place that some people go wrong on, is they're like, no, it's kind of it's my way or the highway.
Yeah.
We've been doing it this way since, blah, the time, and that's the only way that works. Not that every suggestion is good or every suggestion is jump on it at all, but just to be able to at least hear from the staff, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who are doing that role every single day.
Every day.
Sometimes the best suggestions that my company's had in changing things or getting better or whatever have not been my suggestions. It's been a staff suggestion, and then I really look at it. I'm like, oh, that actually could work. Maybe I tweak it a little. Maybe I add something to it, whatever. But hey, that actually could, and then implementing it. So it's important to have an open kind of discussion line with your staff about that, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, even for my software, like some of the best features have just been requests from people who went, oh, hey, could this do blah?
Customers or stuff.
Yeah, customers. Like one of the little things that was added to my software is like I deal with changes really well. So when you have a policy in there and then you update that policy, it'll email all the employees who've read it before and said, hey, here's the update, and then highlights what that change was. So I had a log of changes at one point, and someone went, hey, can this just send an email? Oh, yeah, sure, it could. And, and then reset, yeah, sure. And then someone else went later and went, hey, but nobody knows what changed. Could you highlight it? Yeah, sure, I can highlight what the change is. And then that's been a big selling factor with people, right?
Yeah.
So it's like the people who are interacting with it, with my software, are always going to have better ideas than I do because they interact with it in ways that I don't,
Yeah.
So that's always something important. And then another thing, just jumping back to what made, the group successful is when I hired people, I would always try to scare them.
What do you mean?
It was my job to make them not want the job.
What do you mean?
So what I found, right? Well, okay. So specifically with that company, it might not be relevant with every company, right? But with that company, there were some really hard jobs because you were trying to like, for instance.
Okay, you mean, it's like setting the proper expectation. Like, okay, I get what you're saying. Like, you're going to sell for my roofing company. Hey, this is not an easy job. You're going to need to be grinding and creating your own pipeline. You're going to be this, you're going to be that, making sure they understand the role is here. Don't get them in thinking it's here. And then they come in and they're like, oh.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I would give them, like, for that company specifically, the company was selling really large investments, investment minimum of like $300,000, all cash, right? And so, that the commissions were good and, everything made sense. But when I first went there, we ran into a really big problem with salespeople. There actually weren't any successful salespeople. I was the first person to sell other than the founder in that company. And I found a big part of it. Why was because every person who was hired was like, okay, this is the sales commission. Oh, that's a great sales commission. Yeah. So if you get, 2 sales a month, then you're going to be making this. Great. Even the founder, like the one person who was selling at that point, didn't make 2 sales a month at that point. right? And those salespeople generally would make maybe one sale every 2 months, which is a harsh reality when you start a company. You're going, okay, well, this is your base rate. It's smaller, and you're going to get a sales commission, but it may be 2-3 months down the line. That's something not everyone likes. But the fact is that that's what the job will be. So like you were saying, if someone starts the job and they're going, okay, well, it's been 2 weeks. Where's my first commission? Oh, it's not here. Okay, well, they're immediately going to start trying less. They're going to be starting getting more grumpy. They're going to start chatting negatively, and right. They're like, why wouldn't they? Because they went in with a goal, with an idea, and it's a lot harder to find someone and say, great, yours for sale. It might be 3 months down the line,
right?
And that's when you get that first commission. That's going to be a much harder sale. But when I did that, the people I hired were in it, and then they were successful.
They understood the rules of the game. They understood how the game was going to work, and they went in understanding that, and then they were going to do well, rather than come in and then get told and then get, hey, upset or whatever.
Or if they had a position where, they might get yelled at, I would say, hey, you might get yelled at. It might happen.
Yeah.
Right? We might expect this of you. You'll be given this hatting, but you're going to be expected to achieve this much, especially when the company was first started, because we're in an industry that wasn't established.
Yeah.
Right? So when you're really honest with people about those challenges, it is harder to hire people, but hiring isn't sales.
Yeah.
Right? And I've met so many people.
You're going to end up hiring the right people if you have the right expectations.
You hire the right people, and you have the right level of or expectation of effort to hire those people. But when they come in, they understand the situation, and I would honestly try to make it always be worse.
Yeah.
So instead of saying it'll be 3 months, I would say it would be 6.
Yeah.
Because then when it's 3 months, they're like, that's great.
Yeah. Okay, good. So with what we're talking about here, with bringing an employee and making sure they understand the expectations, the key to that is having things in writing of how a company does things. What are the rules of the company? What are the rules of the sales guys? What are the rules of the production guys? Like actually having all the policies or standard operating procedures of the companies formatted and documented out. So that's like what we use your software for. So every single time we put something in writing that this is how the company's going to do this, this is the standard operating procedure or the checklist or whatever, we upload it in there and then we share it to all the staff. And we have them read it. And then new staff who come in, we're going to go through that. And then we're constantly able to build it, change it, etc. I see a lot of, I would say, smaller companies or companies who don't grow or who don't want to. And I think that's one of the things that holds them back is the process of documenting out those things, or even, a thing of like an executive or an owner kind of being like, well, I'm the only person who does that. And that's just always how it's been, and never really getting it out there. And I remember when I started this journey, the same thing, it was really challenging to kind of sit down and just do that and really get humble and go, no, this isn't just me who can do this. Anyone can do this. Let me put that out in writing how that would go. What would be like, I don't know, your recommendations or like thoughts on like going about just starting to build out standard operating procedures for a company, documenting them, and then sharing them to your staff? Because as soon as I started doing that, that helped my company out a lot. And, I've just sat down, we probably have 50 or 55 of them written now, and it's just our bread and butter. This is how we do things. And if somebody does something and there's a problem, usually in one of those standard operating procedures, it was not followed. Yeah. So we can always go back to it and just say, hey, this is the thing that got, that didn't get done on this. You didn't put the tarp down or whatever it is. Next time, let's do that. And it gives a place to point to it, like an actual stable place, rather than just, I say it's that way. No, it's in writing. That's company policy. So what would you recommend to someone who is just starting off and who wants to kind of document or create those to get those out there?
So depends on where they're at as a company, right? Yeah. You already had a lot of employees and had a lot of success.
Yeah.
So when you're at that point, you jump in and you just start writing things. The viewpoint that you can go with is the fact that like, if you're saying things to people, it's better that it's written. Yeah. Right. So for a few reasons, and this is also kind of how I explain it to people to get them like on board, because you do have to kind of buy in as an owner into doing the process, right? And so one is like lost work, right? So you hire some guy and you're explaining to him, okay, this is how you do this, this is how you do this, this is how you do this. And then you hire another person, or they leave, right? You're gonna have to do, okay, this is how you do this, and that's a lot of time and effort. So that's, if you put a dollar amount and you say, okay, your average business owner is worth at least $75 an hour. Well, okay, if you spend 2 hours training each person, then you're saying that's like $150 you're losing. And if you do that to 10 people, then great, you just lost $1,500, right?
In the process of verbally explaining
things over and over again. So if you just write it down, or you record a video and you just show that video to everybody, then it's a lot less work on you, right? So there's an immediate time save even though maybe writing it down the first time or recording it, instead of taking that 2 hours or an hour and a half, it's going to take double that. It's going to take 3, right? So that's like the initial thing in someone's mind that they go, but I don't have that 3 hours now, so I'll just spend the hour and a half instead.
Yeah.
But then the next time they go, oh, well, I don't have that 3 hours, I'm going to spend the hour and a half instead, until they've just continued to waste money.
And it can be even littler things. Like, for example, I don't know, like quoting metal roofs. I remember I used to just, every single time someone needed help quoting a metal roof, I'd sit down, I would help them, and I would do the whole thing. Whatever, that's what I would do. And I love doing that. But then I got to the point, I'm like, okay, I actually just said, okay, I don't want to do that anymore. It took me only like 5 minutes a time with a sales rep. I'm like, I really want this documented. So it took me probably, I don't know, an hour and a half or something to just completely, exactly the steps we go over all the panel options with the homeowner, go over this, go over that, go over how the gauge, what are all the factors you need to put into this. And I just put that out. And then now somebody asks me, hey, I need some help quoting a metal thing. I'd say, hey, remember, pull up that, write up and just go ahead and check it out. And they pull it up, and then they can just do it based off of that. So it gives you just this ability. They ask a question, hey, refer to that written document.
Exactly. And it ends up being so much time saved. But on the other side of it, like, the problem is that when you explain things verbally and you explain to that first guy, hey, this is how you do the metal roof. Okay, great. The next guy, okay, this is how you do the metal roof. Well, the problem is that you're not going to say things the same way. Right. And you might have an idea the second time that you didn't have the first time.
Right.
And that's all well and fine until those two people are supposed to talk to each other.
Right.
Without you there.
Right.
And so a lot of the basic arguments in a company that cause all the frustrations or whatever is because two people are going off of what you said. But it's different.
Right. One person's like, how do I do this? And then the other person's like, no, it's this way. No, it's that way. And it's just not
And they're both
documented.
right. Because you said it and it was verbal, right? So when you write it down, it becomes something that's solid there, and then it can be a basis of agreement as opposed to a basis of disagreement.
Right.
So that just makes your company instantly more harmonious.
Right.
So that's if you're a company at your size. Those are kind of like the two things I would say. If you're smaller, right? If you're like a solo entrepreneur or you have 2 employees, right? You're going, okay, well,
it's
people
also
aren't
the
going to
value of the company too. Your company's not going to be valuable if you don't have
it's your
operating
IP
procedures in place. It's like, what does someone want to buy otherwise? It's like the only way it works is if the owners run around telling everyone everything. It's like, that's not that valuable.
No, it's certainly not. You definitely can't sell that to someone else.
Yeah.
Right. So when you're smaller, I usually think of it as like business journaling. Right. So you start by just writing on
business journaling. I like that.
Yeah. When you find something new. Okay. Well, you know what? I'm going to stop offering this promotion because I realize that it's not going so well. So even if you're just by your own and you have those things, you write them down. Why? Because you're going to forget it. You don't want it sticking in your brain. And so later, a year later, you don't want to go, ooh, I should do that promotion. Or you make your first hire and they go, ooh, got it. We should do this promotion. And you go, I think there's a reason why we shouldn't, but I can't remember why. And then you do it and you make the mistake and then you lose the money. So when you just write down things as you learn them, then that also serves as like your almanac of your business. And as you start to bring people on, it becomes much easier because someone goes, well, how do I quote a metal roof? Oh yeah, actually I have these 3 things I've written over the last 4 years about why I quote metal roofs the way I do and a few tips.
Right.
And it took me 5 minutes on each one as I just realized it. But here are those 4 things. And then your person's trained.
Yeah. And then eventually your onboarding procedures, just like, okay, good. These are the 30 things you need to read on sales and get a checkout on every one, do this drill on this one. And then boom, now you have a sales rep who can rock and roll rather than the old school way of like, get in the truck with Joe for like 2 weeks. And, and they're I still even now.
Because what does Joe say, right? That's that basis of argument, right?
That is interesting. Oh my goodness. Okay, well, Austin, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate you. Again, I use your software for tracking my statistics, for uploading my policies. That way, instead of being in like a Dropbox or something like that, they're in this really nice user interface where staff can find them. I can easily edit them. I can easily see where they've read them, things like that. The other thing that your software did that we didn't get a chance to talk about is an organization chart, right? You can have it digitally and you can define everybody's purposes and functions. I mean, it does a whole lot of things. It's really cool. I love it. So it's Humanagement. Check it out. What should they do if they want to check it out? Just humanagement.com, right?
Yeah, my favorite thing is for someone to set up a meeting. I mean, you can just sign up and you can just get jumped into the software. I really like learning from people. I like hearing the problems they run into. Sometimes I get great ideas of how to improve the software. I can make it a bit better. So if you go to the website, then just go and click the link to book a meeting with me or one of the salespeople, and then we can get into a whole conversation, show you exactly how the software can really improve things, easier. That's what I did with you. I came over here and I showed you. It's a lot easier than you just going through. And I mean, we have help docs and stuff, but
I was using another HR software before, and I really preferred yours. So I'm going to put a link in the description of the podcast. It's going to show where to go if you want to check it out. Thank you so much for coming on, Austin. I appreciate you, buddy.
Awesome.
Okay, man.